Hey, it's Andy Yanez, and welcome to another episode of Let's Rage Coogs, presented by the Saxenian Family, coming off the heels of another Houston Cougars basketball game. This time on the losing side of things, as the Temple Owls give all the credit to Temple. They came into the Fertitta Center and they were a step ahead of the Houston Cougars for much of the night here tonight inside the Fertitta Center. Now, when it comes to Houston, this loss brings them down to 6-1 against American Athletic Conference foes. It's their first conference loss of the season, of course. It stopped a 9-game winning streak, and really, it was a brutal loss for Houston in terms of shooting perspective from the field, especially from the free throw line. They missed 10 free throws in and of itself. Temple was able to convert on those charity stripe shots. But without further ado, joining me as always, Kris Gardner of the Houston Round Ball Review, Dayon Dunlap. How are you two doing?
I'm doing well. I'm counting up. I'm looking at the play-by-play stats here, and I'm counting up the number of jumpers or shots by the Cougs missed in the paint. I'm at 11 right now. 11. So
A lot
it's
of
more
missed
than that.
opportunities.
So, but yeah, I'm doing good. How are you guys doing?
Yeah, I'm doing good as well. I'm doing as good as well. It was a good game. A lot of interesting takes that I have while watching it.
And so let's get right into it. Let's start with that second half because Temple, like I said at the opening of the show, it seemed like Temple was just a step ahead of the Houston Cougars for much of the night. Even starting the first half, they hit the first 3-point basket. It seemed like both of the teams were kind of, I don't know if you could say feeding each other out, but certainly there was kind of like a tennis match where both teams were going back and forth, but the Owls always seemed to have that edge. They were always out in front. They were able to build a 6-point lead in the first half, and then at halftime they were tied at 30 apiece. And then in the second half, Temple just kept not pouring it on, but they continued to hit big shots. They opened up the half, and then they went up by as many as 7, I want to say again. And towards the end of the second half, when they were up 55-48, and give credit to the Houston Cougars defense, because when it was 55-48, it seemed like that's really when that Fertitta Center was as quiet as it has been all season long. There was really no buzz inside the arena until after it became 55-48. Houston went on a 7-0 run. They tied the game at 55. Give credit to Jawan Roberts, who had a huge steal, and then he had the layup and one that he had that allowed him to tie the game because he converted on the free throw. But then Temple was able to split. They were their own pair of free throws. I believe it was Damian Dunn that had the final go-ahead basket in terms of that free throw. They were up 56-55. And with 8 seconds left after a shot clock violation, Houston had a chance. Jamal Shed was able to get all the way to the rim for a layup, and he had it blocked. 1.3 seconds left. Houston has a final chance. They draw up a perfect play, which Kelvin Sampson said you can't get any much better than that with the play that was designed. Tremont Mark had a chance to have a go-ahead layup to really walk off the game, and it just kind of like the entire night just did not fall. Was just short, rolled out, and that's how Temple comes away with a victory. Kris, Dayon, whoever wants to take it first. What stood out to you about Houston? We could start with offense. We could start about that late rally that they were able to tie the game. It seemed like they were going to be able to get over the hump, but like Kelvin Sampson said, they just weren't able to hit the big shot in this game.
Go ahead, Dayon.
Well, for me, just starting throughout the game instead of going to like the closing moments, one thing that was sticking out to me that Houston was a lot of isolation situations where it was basically some one-on-one action, someone going one-on-one, and they weren't able to make the shots. Jared's got a lot of good looks that in point blank range that I'm sure normally makes or I feel positive that he can make. But early on, that's what I was seeing. Houston was in a lot of isolation situations. I think Marcus did a really good job today of being the playmaker and facilitator. And I mean, he really did really whatever the team needed today. I think he had one of his better performances all around in regards to just playing all around basketball, doing what the team needed. But offensively, that's what stood out to me. It wasn't as much of ball movement as much. And then I think one thing that offensively that they realized that they started to take advantage was I started isolating someone on the block, whether it was Jarris or J1, and Temple would bring the double, and Houston was able to move the basketball looking for that diagonal three or diagonal shot. And so they were able to take advantage of that in the half court set. But too many times, in my opinion, they were in isolation situations, which often it didn't go their way as far as the shot being made.
There's a lot of things to depends on your perspective how you want to take this game. The Cougs are 9 for 14 on layups. I counted a rough count. They missed 17 shots in the paint, including a couple of getting shots, layup attempts blocked. But they missed 10 free throws. Temple missed 2 free throws. The Cougs lost by 1. The Cougs did not shoot well. Neither team shot well. Temple did not make a basket like the last 7 minutes of the game. The Cougs, both teams struggled to make shots down the stretch. So that was good defense, and some part of it, just shots not falling. Kelvin Sampson getting a technical foul and 2 free throws that Temple got. So, I mean, what perspective you want to take from it, we could just say all that. In spite of all that, the Cougs got a great look. It was a well-executed out-of-bounds play. Jamal Mark had a great shot, and it rolled off, and they lost by a point.
I definitely think free throws was the biggest factor for Houston as far as losing the game. I think not only because for the numbers that you mentioned, I mean, it's you watch the game, Houston make their free throws, they win. Their defense wasn't the problem. They still was able to execute enough offensively to be in the game and even to bring them back in the game. And so it really kind of boiled down to free throws and missing close shots like you just mentioned, Chris. And I mean, that's what I see.
You know, and Andy's going to play clips from Coach Sampson post-game. The free throws became mental because you could see the frustration on Jarrett's face when he missed the first of his free throws at a trip for 2. He put his hands up like, what now? Jamal Mark, what now? Those kind of things. So it became contagious. I don't expect Reggie Chaney to be a good free throw shooter because he hasn't been in his UH career.
But Jarrett Ramon, I think is more of can't believe in a miss, especially.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They're just like, I can't believe I missed. I mean, that kind of thing. So Jarrett was 3 for 6. Tremont was 2 for 4. That's guys you kind of know to make free throws. Tremont's been a funk from the line the last few games, or 2 out of the last 3 games, whatever. It's January. Hopefully this is just a bad patch from the line, and this is it for the season for the Cougs, because this is like Cougar lore, missing free throws as part of like Houston Cougar men's basketball history that this team this year had not done until today, really, where a game we could say cost them. They lost this game at the foul line. Temple missed 2, and one of the 2 Temple missed was Damian Dunn in the last few seconds to give the Cougs a chance to win the game. Temple missed 2, the Cougs missed 10. Temple didn't shoot well. Temple shot 31% from the floor. 31%. They made 5 buckets in the second half, but they won the game by a point because the Cougs missed 10 free throws and Temple missed 2.
They made that. We got to give Temple. Not only did Houston miss theirs, but Temple made theirs.
Temple made theirs. 20 for 22 from the line. 20 for 22.
Theirs. Yeah.
It could be just as simple as that at the line right there.
And in regards to Temple, Chris, I think it's funny that you mentioned kind of the Houston lore in terms of the free throw shooting teams in the past that have been played with. And on the other side, like you mentioned, Temple, they're towards the top teams, not only the American Athletic Conference, but in the entire country when it comes to free throw shooting. And they proved it tonight. They're actually 17th in the country when it comes to best free throw percentage. So they put it on full display against Cougars tonight on this Sunday afternoon. We're going to hear from Marcus Sasser first, and it's interesting, Dayon, you mentioned about what you saw in terms of Houston, a lot of one-on-one, a lot of isolation at times for the Cougars. Marcus Sasser, he shouted out Temple's team defense overall that really made it tough on the Cougars. But before we hear what Marcus Sasser had to say, we'd like to remind those of you that are watching live on the Houston Round Ball Review YouTube channel or listening audio only the next day of on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever else you listen to your podcast, that this is Let's Rage Coogs, presented by the Saxenian Family. And of course, we also like to give a shout out to our other sponsors, beginning with Hoop and Holler, the Houston Cougars Micro Collective. They are the entity behind the Star Pizza commercials. Most recently, the newest commercial with Ryan Elvin. If you haven't checked that out, be sure to do so at Star Pizza HOU on Twitter. It's a great commercial with Ryan Elvin and former Houston Cougars star Dejan Jarreau. And in reference to Star Pizza, they are another sponsor of today's episode of Let's Rage Coogs with various locations across the Houston area. Be sure to visit Star Pizza at one of their various locations or visit them online at starpizza.net. Star Pizza, Houston's best pizza since 1976. And last but not least, our other sponsor for today's episode of Let's Rage Coogs, HOUNIL. HOUNIL.com is a subscription-based name, image, and likeness model that benefits both Cougar student athletes and fans. HOUNIL helps Houston athletes benefit from the new name, image, and likeness rules. Athletes create original content in their own words, giving subscribers insight into their lives on and off the court. What the players need is for you to subscribe, and plans start at just $20 a month, and that money goes to UH athletes. Subscribers will get one-of-a-kind content straight from the players while helping the Houston Cougars compete on a national stage. Subscribe at HOUNIL.com, and as always, go Cougs. So on the other side of it, here's what Marcus Sasser had to say following Houston's 56-55 loss to the Owls. Marcus Sasser had 12 points. He shot 4-11 from the field, and he went 2 for 3 from the free throw line. Here's what Sasser had to say about the Temple defense.
They just had a good team defense. You know, they played in the passing lanes, had good help on certain people. Double team the post good. I just say overall, the team defense was just, you know, it was kind of difficult to score on rather than individual defense.
And something that was underrated about this Temple team, they did a good job at being able, at times, they did a good job at being able to swarm and limit Houston to just one shots, unlike we've seen in the past where they get 2, 3, 4 cracks at it. And that was a different where Houston wasn't able to capitalize on those, like Kelvin says, second, third, 4-shot teams, opportunities.
The Cougs missed 37 shots. They got 12 offensive rebounds. Coach Sampson likes to get, he tells us 50%.
Mm-hmm.
Well, 12 out of 37 is not 50%. So that's a problem.
It's less than 1/3.
Credit to Temple. Temple did just enough to win. Okay. Down the stretch, Temple got kind of tight. I think Coach McKee slowed down what was working for Temple a lot earlier, and the Cougs defense tightened up and got better, and the Cougs did enough to get back in the game. They had a chance to win those final seconds. I mean, think about it. The shot Tremont Mark made to beat Memphis a couple years ago was a half-court heave. The shot he got today was a 5-footer and rolled off. That's basketball. That's how it works. And, you know, it stinks to lose like this, but Coach Sampson told all of us that the Cougs wouldn't lose again this season. And, well, one of them happened tonight. Happened today.
Yeah, and when I was saying I got in a lot of isolation situations, it was to credit Temple's defense because Houston wasn't playing isolation ball. They were running their normal sets. It just Temple was defending them so well, the shot clock would get down and they would be forced to be in an isolation situation to create for themselves. So that's what kind of I meant by that. And another thing, the takeaway that I watched that Eric Key and one thing they did a great job of was the way they attacked Houston's double teams on that pick and roll. And one thing Coach Sampson did to make an adjustment was the way that they guarded. Instead of doubling it and blitzing it, they just started switching the pick and rolls, and Houston was starting to make being able to contain them offensively, and that was the difference for how Houston started getting stop after stop after stop because their defensive adjustment. They started switching because everybody that was on the floor could switch. It was Reggie, J1. It was Coach Sampson's most trusted lineup with J1, Reggie, Tremont, Jamal, and Marcus. And once he made that adjustment, the defense was again at a high level. And so those were some of the things that I saw. But Houston, Marcus, I think in that one shot, it wasn't that I didn't like the shot. I just would have preferred the ball in Marcus's hands and him to take the shot with Jamal Shedd's late game layup that was blocked. And he beat his man. He got in just to help defense and got the block. I mean, there's credit to the defense. Just Marcus, I would have preferred the ball in Marcus's hands. I think Jamal shot the ball 16 times today. That's 5 more times than Marcus. I mean, not saying that he was forcing it or anything like that. I just would prefer Marcus to get those looks, but to Marcus's credit, he did what the game dictated for him. They collapsed on him. He passed out and made plays. That's why I think just watching him he must have taken the advice and the criticism from the NBA scouts and really applied that to his game. When I watch him, that's exactly what I see. I see him from developing for the next level because he can make plays with the ball in his hands. He's making smarter plays, and I'm sure that's what they challenge him to do. Can you be someone to make plays with the ball in your hands? And he's done an excellent job at doing that this year. I just from a selfish perspective, I would have wanted him to take more shots.
That's an interesting point. Well, Chris, sorry to cut you off because that's something that you mentioned during the game in regards to Jamal Shedd's shooting. But down to the point that you mentioned, that's credit to Temple because it seemed like they were kind of that was their game plan going in for Jamal Shedd to be the one on the court, to be the one if he's the one that's hitting his shots, which he had a couple of big shots, in particular a couple of threes from the corners that were a big boost for Houston. But it seemed like Temple, that was their game plan going in. They were content with being the way that the Houston Cougars beat them. Down, like you said, on that penultimate play for the Houston Cougars on offense. I mean, Jamal Shedd got straight to the rim, kind of going back to what Marcus Sasser said in his postgame clip. That's just a sign of how good defensively Temple was as a team overall on that play. Chris, what are you going to say?
Dan, you sure you went in the postgame? Because or watched already? Because you said some things that Coach Sampson said almost exactly. I mean, verbatim.
I know the game, man.
You know the game for sure. And about this, I mean, just overall about the shots Temple got, the defense, Temple, the switching defense when he put Reggie back in the game right down the stretch. That's one of the reasons he touted for putting Reggie in, because of the switching for everybody, all five to switch, because they did have a few problems with rotations, leaving the wrong 3-point shooters for Temple open in the first half, especially. And that's Jarris Walker's got to get better on that, and some of the younger guys got to get better on that, and that's why we did not see them play as much, younger players, because they were just off defensively today as a unit, the younger guys. But put Reggie in, the switching was much better down the stretch, and Temple's shots were much more difficult, and they missed them. Jamal was 1 for 8 from 2, 3 for 8 from 3. And as you said, I don't like Jamal taking more shots than anybody. But I mean, 4 more than Jarris, 5 more than Marcus. That was Temple's game plan, had to be make Jamal beat us. And Jamal didn't do it today. But also, the Cougs missed 10 free throws and a 1-point loss. So if anybody would have made 2 more free throws, the Cougs would have won, and Jamal still would have took 16 shots. It was not a pretty game at all, by any stretch. They did not play well enough to win, and they lost. But if they just make 2 more free throws, or Temple makes 2 less free throws, either way you want to look at it, the Cougs walk out here with a win, but they didn't get it today.
Or if Houston fouled less. That's something Coach Sampson talks about, like Houston fouling less.
Yep, that as well. That was a problem as well.
That's a great point. Now, on the other side of this break, we'll hear what head coach Kelvin Sampson had to say. But first, I'd like to remind you guys that may be watching live and or listening to the audio-only version the next day, or whenever you may be listening, however you may be listening. This is Let's Rage Coogs, presented by the Saxenian Family. Of course, we have our triad of sponsors for today's episode of Let's Rage Coogs, the unofficial Houston postgame show for football and men's basketball. And Let's Rage Coogs will be sponsored by the Saxenian Family for the remainder of the men's basketball regular season and into the American Athletic Conference postseason tournament. Now, in regard to our other sponsors, we'd like to say thank you, beginning with HOU NIL. As the Cougars move to the Big 12, Houston will be competing with national players in basketball like Kansas, Baylor, Texas Tech, and more. Those schools have fans that have built huge name, image, and likeness groups to get their athletes NIL compensation. That gives them a huge advantage over U of H, where NIL is still in its infancy. But you can help Cougar athletes by getting involved. Go to HOUNIL.com to subscribe to player-created content like essays, video podcasts, and get access to private events with the U of H players. The players are compensated for creating content, and fans get an inside look at their lives, and plans start at just $20 a month. That money helps the Cougars retain players to stay at the top in basketball and build momentum in football. HOUNIL.com. Subscribers get one-of-a-kind content straight from Cougar athletes. Subscribe today at HOUNIL.com And as always, go Cougs. On the topic of name, image, and likeness, of course, we'd like to say thank you to our other two sponsors, beginning with Hoop and Heart of the Houston Cougars Micro Collective. They are the entity behind the Star Pizza commercials, which brings us to Star Pizza, the other sponsor of today's episode of Let's Rage Coogs, with various locations across the Houston area. Be sure to make Star Pizza a stop on your way home, especially after a game like this. I'm sure people are going to be hungry with the nerves because it came down to the wire. Star Pizza, Houston's best pizza since 1976. Be sure to visit them online at starpizza.net. And without further ado, here's what head coach Kelvin Sampson had to say following Houston's 56-55 loss to Temple, which brings them down to 18-2 overall and 6-1 in the American Athletic Conference.
Not going to shut them out. I mean, they're going to score points. Hicks is an outstanding shooter. Disappointing, had 8 attempts. You know, we changed up our coverage, our pick and roll coverage down the stretch, and that helped. It kept them off the three-point line, and we stopped fouling them for a while. That's how we got back in it. We stopped fouling them, kept them off the three-point line. We just never could make the big play. We needed a big shot, you know, and we've made that dozens and dozens of times over the years where maybe we had not a very good offensive night, but we still found a way to win. Tonight, we didn't. We never made the big shot. Even with all that, you know, we called timeout and we dropped that little action that we ran and got Tremont wide open for basically a layup, and even that didn't go in. So, but for us, you know, I don't, like I said, I don't overreact to wins and I don't overreact to losses. You know, that's Shaw's job to tell everybody what we did wrong or did right. I don't worry about none of that. We got a big game on Wednesday night against Central Florida, and I'll watch this film as quick as I can, figure out what we can do to be better, and then I'm gonna move on to Central Florida. That becomes a big game Wednesday night.
Back here to Dusty. Coach, you talk about wisdom and lessons. What is the biggest lesson you think that you learned and that your team learned tonight, and what's your message going forward into the next one?
Well, my message never changes. You know, it's my 34th year as a head coach in college. I don't know the exact number, but I've lost 300 and some times as a coach. So I've got a lot of practice at doing what I'm doing right now. I've done this a lot. I've lost a lot of games. This won't be the last one this year either. You know, I think the big thing is the thing they need to hear is that we still have a good team. We had a bad day, but we still have a good team. All of our dreams and goals are still in front of us. You know, we hit a little bit of a road bump today. I'll make sure they know that. We'll watch the film and show where our mistakes occurred. And I'll slap on the back and say, let's go get them Wednesday.
Got time for a couple more. Get a chance to please.
Because this team is so good, you guys don't have a lot of, as a coach, you have a lot of opportunities to turn losses into lessons. With that being said, what's the approach moving forward? You know, after the game like this?
What do you mean approach?
Just as far as like using this loss as a lesson.
There is no approach. You know, we got 31 games. You know, the last time we lost was on December 10th. So watch the film and get ready for the next game. I don't make a big deal out of it. I wish we'd have won, but we didn't. So I don't think we're going to shoot any more free throws the next few days than we have been. We practice free throw shooting probably more than most. Our guys have been shooting the free throw better, actually. I think our free throw percentage at one time was 68, 69. I think we're up close to 72 now. So some days they go in.
Once again, that was Houston Cougars head coach Kelvin Sampson. He touched on a lot of different things, in particular free throw shooting. He talked about the ball not being able to go their way. Deon, I'll go to you. Stood out to you from what Kelvin had to say post game.
I mean, nothing much really stick out. I mean, he was just really on to the next one. It was kind of pretty much what we talked about and discussed, and that's pretty much what he saw. And so I'm like him. I mean, it wasn't one thing I guess that stuck out was we still have a good team. What he said, and so although we took a loss, I'm gonna tell this team we still have a good team. We still have the opportunity to reach our dreams and goals. So that was my thought process. And I mean, they can learn some things from this, but it wasn't like Houston just played bad. They just honestly just missed shots, missed free throws.
You know, seeing the comments by the fans who watching on the YouTube channel, the one-on-one offense was what Temple forced them to play. When they passed the ball, many times they got the ball tossed down to J1 and Juwan in the post, Temple used a monster defense, double team the post to make him kick it out and then make him reset or do something else offensively. So Temple used a Houston staple defensively on the Cougs. So that was an issue. But we also saw when Juan picked up that fourth foul early and was taken out of the game and sat on the bench, the defense changed, the low post option really was gone. So if there was a double team, there was nobody. If he would get the ball to the post, he could kick it out and make the offense easier. Without him in the game, the defense suffered a bit and the offense suffered a bit. So we see another example of his importance to the team on both ends of the court. He can get early fouls, and we can quibble about whether some of those fouls are right on him or not. He got them. He was called for them. And he missed a lot of time on the bench because of it. So that's a factor as well. So we can talk about this, that, the 1 point loss. I'm curious to see how it's going to impact the Cougs in the net ranking, how it's going to be a quad 3 loss. Temple was ranked like in the 140s, but it'll boost Temple's net after this with a big road win for them. So how that's going to impact them going forward and the Cougs in the 1 seed and all those things. The biggest disappointment is the Cougs had a lot of things go their way yesterday with losses by UCLA and Kansas, but they followed up themselves today with a loss at home to Temple. So it all bounces out. And there's not a great team this season. There's a lot of good teams this season. There's not a great team this season. We talked about, for many of these less Rage Coogs, how great this team was, Houston is offensively. Well, you missed 10 free throws. That impacts your offense as well in a 1 point game.
Oh, Kris, that's a great point. You mentioned that there are no great teams this year. It's something that Kelvin Sampson mentioned during his post-game availability towards the end of it. You know, there's a lot of parity in college basketball. And Kris, like you mentioned, what happened over the weekend, a lot of different games that had Houston been able to pull out the victory against Temple would have really helped them and really could have solidified their case for being a number 1 seed. Now it makes things a lot more murky. Now another thing that Kelvin Sampson touched on in regards of not just the Houston Cougars, but overall the bigger picture across the American Athletic Conference. He said he was asked, what his thoughts are on the conference in terms of it being underrated, and he said he's been saying it for a while now, and people just didn't listen to how really physical and underrated this conference is. And we saw it at the beginning, first game of the conference against UCF. When they came in here, they gave Houston a run for their money. The Cougars were able to make plays and walk away with a victory. We saw it against South Florida. Similar, I felt like that South Florida game had a much similar, it went a lot similar to this game. The only difference is that the Houston Cougars weren't able to make the plays to come out on top tonight compared to that USF game. And then, of course, Temple, they came in here, and like I said, they seemed like they were just a step ahead of Houston for much of the game. And when Houston made their rally toward the end, they did just enough to be able to eke out the 56-55 win. But Kris, I'll go to you first. What are your thoughts in terms of the conference and it being underrated? Because we saw teams keep beating each other left and right, and it's kind of from a national perspective, like, oh, yep, that's just how bad the American is. But it could just be how, like Kelvin said, and head coach for Temple said as well, how underrated the conference is.
Well, since Houston is in the American, we see the teams in the American. We've said how tough this conference is, time and time again, and the narrative nationally does not want to see it, accept it, acknowledge it, what have you. So that's what the Cougs have to deal with for a few more months in this conference. Temple don't have a great record. They're now 12-9 overall, but they're 6-2 in the American. They're a good team. They did enough to win today. There are other good teams in this conference. The Cougs lead now is what, a half game technically, because they lost today. So there are other teams who have a chance to win the conference. This is a good conference. Is it elite like Big 12? No, but it's not the SWAC. I mean, some national people are treating like it's just a bunch of, it's the Cougs and nothing. And that is not the case.
And I think the Big East gets more respect than the American. And the Big East got a lot of good basketball programs over there. But yeah, I mean, I really can't add more than what Kris said. He pretty much hit the nail on the head. I mean, there's some good teams in this conference with some good guards that can compete on any level in any conference, and some good coaches as well.
Absolutely, and we just seen a string of good coaches these last few games that Houston has played against. I think it's interesting you mentioned the Big East. Well, they have a team as well in Georgetown that just has not been able to beat an opponent. And how long is that losing streak? It extends over a season, and in which they really struggle. Then at least the American Athletic Conference doesn't have that, but that's going into one conference to the other. Kind of digressing back into this game and in terms of this, the way it turned out specifically. So there have been a lot of comparisons made to the Alabama game. Now we heard Kelvin Sampson after the game, Kris, talk about how he doesn't overreact to wins or losses. Similar message to what he said following their loss to Alabama. Now, in terms of what Houston was able to show here down the stretch, they got good looks. Again, going 8 seconds left, Jamal Should got to the rim. He had a layup, got blocked. Jamon Mark had the potential for a go-ahead shot. How do you feel their late-game execution was against Temple? Because they went on a 7-0 run. They held Temple scoreless for an extended period of time to tie the game and put themselves in position to walk off and escape with a win.
The last second shot was great. Previously, the previous possession when I think it was Jamal took that three-point shot. I'm not sure what they were running on that one, what they're trying to get, because they seemed uncertain themselves. But overall, they got a lot of good looks. They didn't make them, and that's just one of those things. I mean, it sounds just simple to say, but that's reality in college basketball when you don't have a series. This is one and done. Tournament time is one and done. I'm not sure. I feel pretty sure if the Cougs and Temple played a best of 7, the Cougs will win the series. But today was not a series. It's just one game. The Cougs had a bad game from the free throw line, and they lost by a point. I want to touch on real quick about King's post comment about other teams in the conference need to win nationally and win the tournament to get respect nationally. The Big Ten has done that, except for maybe 2 teams. What did the Big Ten do last year? Like they sent like 9 or 10 teams, and 1 team got out of the first round, something like that. But it's the Big Ten this year, still the Big Ten. Oh well, recent history. Last season, they stunk in the tournament. Didn't change their narrative. So the Americans battled this narrative for its existence. It's going to be an issue next year. Come July 1st, this will no longer be a problem for the Cougs. This will be Memphis and SMU and everybody else left in the Americans issue going forward. But today, the Cougs did not play well. They not even played good. But they had a chance at the end to win the game. And that's what I am hanging my hat on. Despite playing poorly, they had a great look to win the game in the last second. And it didn't fall.
Yeah, and I think their defensive execution was great. I think the offensive execution down the stretch could have been better, but I wouldn't say that it was bad. I just think they could have executed better, could have gotten better looks. But J1 is a definitely difference maker. Offensive end, defensive end, he's a difference maker. And when that last foul he picked up was not a foul. That was a BS call for sure.
It was on Jamal. I think Jamal reached in first.
Yeah. But he's a huge piece. And Reggie as well. Reggie is so important. His ability to defend on the perimeter is something that we really, really need, because he gives us that ability to switch and guards and it not be a mismatch. I'm hearing the commentators say mismatch with whenever it's Jarris or Rachel who switched on the guards, and they was able to hold their own more than not. And so I mean, I'm not really putting much stock in this loss, like Coach Sampson. I mean, we definitely could have won, but that's just the way the game goes sometimes.
Yeah, and
Chris, to add on to
America,
your point
it was
from
a quad
Demeric.
3 loss. Yeah, it was a quad 3 loss. So that's the biggest problem. This is a home loss.
Exactly. And that's
That's
what
it.
Kelvin Sampson said after the
Yeah,
game.
that's the biggest disappointment, that this was a loss at home. That's all. You know, they play Temple in 2 weeks in Philadelphia, get a chance to bounce back and get that win in Temple, win in Philadelphia. But yeah, that's the biggest disappointment today. It was at home. Other than that, we all said here on the show that the Cougars are not going to go undefeated in conference play. We said that. Well, they got a loss today. On to Orlando on Wednesday.
Yes, sir. But before we move to Orlando on Wednesday, I'd like to remind everybody that's watching live and or listening audio only wherever you get your podcast that you are listening or watching to Let's Rage Coogs presented by the Saxenian Family. The Saxenian Family is a primary sponsor of Let's Rage Coogs, the unofficial postgame show of Houston football and men's basketball, and will be the primary sponsor of Let's Rage Coogs following men's basketball games for the remainder of the regular season and into the American Athletic Conference postseason tournament. Of course, we couldn't do this show without our sponsors and partners, really, beginning with Hoop and Holler, the Houston Cougars Micro Collective. They are the entity behind those infamous Star Pizza commercials. I guess they're not infamous, just famous. They're notorious. I keep doing these negatives, but anyways, these very famous Star Pizza commercials with Houston Cougar athletes, with D'Anthony Jones from the football team, of course Ryan Elvin and Dejan Giroux, that just released about 2 weeks ago, and of course they're promoting Star Pizza, who is one of our other sponsors on today's episode of Let's Rage Coogs, with various locations across the Houston area. Make sure to make Star Pizza a stop on the way home because they are Houston's best pizza since 1976. Be sure to follow them online on social media, including Twitter at Star Pizza HOU, and visit their website at starpizza.net. And last but not least, HOUNIL. HOUNIL.com is a subscription-based name, image, and likeness model that benefits both Cougar student athletes and fans. HOUNIL helps Houston athletes benefit from the new name, image, and likeness rules. What the players need for you is to subscribe, and plans start at just $20 a month, and that money goes straight to the UH athletes who create original content in their own words, giving subscribers insight into their lives on and off the court. Subscribers get one-of-a-kind content straight from the players while helping Houston Cougars compete on a national stage. Subscribe at HOUNIL.com, and as always, go Cougs. For those that may be interested, Dak Prescott just threw an interception down. I know you're keeping track of that 49ers score first as they take an early 3-0 lead. So Chris is silently cheering at his home after hearing those news. But in regards to the Houston Cougars, as we start to wrap things up here, Chris, look at it from a bigger lens perspective. This loss, could it be obviously, of course, it depends what other teams do, but could this loss be enough to keep Houston from being a number 1 seed come March?
Ultimately, yes, but it also depends on what other teams do, you know, because, and you guys are right when y'all said that KU would lose in Big 12 play. Well, they've lost twice, you know, and they might lose to Baylor tomorrow. So if Kansas still continues losing, then the Cougs could be okay if they resume winning. If UCLA has few more losses, that helps the Cougs. So it depends on what other teams do. The loss today being a home loss, it's a quad 3 loss. So it might be the worst of the 5 or 6 teams the Cougs are battling for the 1 seed. So that is an issue. But my main issue going forward for the tournament is I do not want Houston to face or be in the same region, be in the KC region with the Jayhawks. I don't care if they're in the KC region with Alabama. I don't want to be in that region with the Jayhawks because that's like a home court advantage for them come the final regional final. But other than that, the Cougs going to be in a tournament. We know that. Where they play, matchup-wise, it'll come down to matchups, of course. But if they can avoid KU in Kansas City, other than that, I'm good with everything else.
I love Houston's matchup against Kansas. I don't care where it is. Honestly, I watched Kansas play about 4 or 5 games this year.
Good point.
I love our matchup against
because
Kansas.
they're having problems outside of Jalen Wilson. Anybody else, I think the Cougs can be one-on-one. That's a very good point. Yes,
it scared me. Dick can shoot, but I ain't worried about nobody. but Kansas. But yeah,
Texas Christian could be an interesting team if they match up with
nice.
come the NCAA
Oh
tournament.
yeah, I mean matchups. It all comes down to matchups because it's one and done.
Absolutely.
Question for you guys, real quick. If and it doesn't matter because this is a hypothetical. But in a best of 5 or best of 7, I'm not sure I'd pick anybody else but Houston in a series. But
I agree.
It's one and done. So, any given night, you miss free throws, a guard gets hot, from 3 or anything like that. But I'm not sure too many teams could beat Houston 3 times or 4 times in a series.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we don't have that in college basketball.
Right. I actually love the tournament, but just thinking about that, I don't know. Any team, Purdue maybe with the big that they have, they can give us some problems. But I don't know for 3 or 4. Nah, I don't know. I can't see that either.
So yeah,
I would say no because of you got to defer to Kelvin Sampson's ability to make adjustments after one game. Right. That's why I would think Houston would have that advantage and that edge.
But yeah, K-State's good. Like I said, there are a lot of good teams in college hoops this season. There's not an elite team. We saw Purdue struggle at home to Maryland. And Zach Edey, I think Purdue scored 58. Zach Edey scored 24. So outside of him, they don't have a lot of consistent offensive threats.
Real quickly, I wanted to share a tweet, kind of a screenshot that GoCoogs.com, our friends at GoCoogs.com had sent out after the loss. But it says that Houston fell in the KenPom rankings from number 1 to, well, they didn't fall. They're still number 1 in the KenPom rankings. So that's interesting to note there. Like you mentioned, Chris, it'll be interesting to see how things shake up in the net rankings come tomorrow morning. Now, of course, when we look at the national poll rankings, Houston's going to fall. I'd be curious to see how many notches they fall off. And compared, again, going back to the national view of the American Athletic Conference, a team like Temple that coming into the game, they had a good conference record. They were 5-2 against the American Athletic Conference opponents. They were 11-9 overall. So now they're 6-2, and Houston just a half game ahead of Temple. So like you said, Chris, they're going to play each other in about 2 weeks, February 5 in Philadelphia. That'll be a game to watch now. Mark, it becomes much more important day on. It looks like the Dallas Cowboys just did something nice. What happened?
Scored a touchdown, apparently.
Almost. I tackled at the 2 or 3.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. It's making it an interesting game. So let's see if they can pull off the upset against the San Francisco 49ers. But as we start to wrap things up here, Chris, I'll go over to you. Just any final takeaway that you have of this Houston Cougars and Temple game. Again, something that we mentioned is it wasn't realistic to expect Houston to go 18-0 in conference. Now, that's out the window. They were close to winning 10 straight in a row, but outside of potentially derailing them from a number 1 seed, it's just on to the next one, like Kelvin Sampson said, into Central Florida. Now, the key thing is not allowing the picking up any of the bad habits, particularly when it comes to free throw shooting, because that could be something that costs them in a one-and-done tournament, whether it be the NCAA tournament come March.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my main takeaway is today's loss was at home. It was a home loss. I'm kind of curious to see what the bracketologists do, because when the Cougs played at Tulane, most of them said even with the loss there, the Cougs would still be a 1 seed. So I wonder if that changes based on today's home loss to Temple and with other losses by Kansas and UCLA and, teams around them. So that's the main thing is today was a home loss. Got to make free throws. Someone yelled out, a fan yelled out at the game, they're free. But Coach Sampson also said his players don't miss on purpose. Did not miss the free throws on purpose. They just missed. It's just one of those games where they missed 10 and Temple missed 2 and Temple won by 1.
Yeah, my biggest takeaway is Houston is a really, really good defensive team, and it really stood out to me how important Jaywan is. Today's game really, really stood out to me on how important he is against good teams down the stretch. I know we won games in times where he wasn't on the floor. He may not have his best game, but I'm just watching in clutch moments against good teams in the tournament. Jaywan is going to be a very important piece for us. That's one thing that stood out to me. But other than that, I mean, I didn't take too much into this loss. Houston will bounce back. I still want to see want to see Tremont be a little bit more aggressive. I want him to take more shots, honestly. I mean, I want Marcus to take more shots, but he just has such a great game just from an entire basketball perspective. But, I mean, I still feel great about this team.
Absolutely. Before we wind things down, just to look at the conference standings. Following Houston's loss to Temple, the Cougars still stand at number 1 in the American Athletic Conference, just by a half a game now. They're 6-1 overall against American Athletic Conference opponents, and of course, they're 18-2 overall, 20 games into the season. Temple sits at number 2. They're 6-2, and Memphis sits third at 5-2. Had Temple lost, Memphis would have been the number 2 team in the conference after tonight, but because Temple won, they sit at third. Cincinnati's 5-3, Tulane is 5-3, and UCF, who Houston will see on Wednesday evening, they are 4-3 against American Athletic Conference opponents. They are 13-6 overall. That'll be Houston's next game on the road in Orlando. Of course, the Knights came into the Fertitta Center and gave Houston all they could handle. They gave them a good run for their money come New Year's Eve, just 3 weeks ago now. Kris, last thing in regards to you, but do you think that this matchup will be similar, different? What do you think you can expect from Houston and UCF come Wednesday?
UCF they're so banged up now that they're struggling. So I'm not sure, outside of Taylor Hendricks, what consistent options they have. But they're going to be playing in front of their home crowd. And ironically, with the Cougs lost today, they won't come into Orlando as number 1 ranked team in the country. So some of that luster is gone. So some of the fans might be less enthused about it. You know, probably maybe it's still top 5 for Houston. But UCF is injured. And I think 1 or 2 of their players are gone for the season. So it could be it needs to be a bounce back opportunity for Houston to get the win. And remember, everybody, the game was going to be on ESPN+. So,
Dan, I'll toss it over to you. First, Brett Marquardt just keeps missing extra points.
This one got blocked. He was going to miss it anyway. But I think that, I'm expecting Houston to bounce back, like Kris is saying, and I got Houston plus 10.
Plus 10. I would agree with you, Dan. I think that's going to be a bounce back performance just because of what we've seen in the past from the Houston Cougars. And Kris, like you mentioned, it is a banged up Knights team. Now, Houston's next home game will be next Saturday afternoon at 1:15 p.m. tip-off against the Cincinnati Bearcats. That's going to be a CBS game broadcast. I was talking to someone here after the game. It will be the main CBS broadcast going into it, so that nationally televised game for Houston. Certainly Houston will be looking to bounce back at home following this loss to Temple. Now, once again, the final score here from inside the Fertitta Center, the Temple Owls and Houston's 9-game winning streak in hand. The Cougars, their first conference loss of the season. Houston drops to 6-1 against American Athletic Conference opponents. They are 18-2 overall. Jamal Shedd led Houston in scoring with 13 points. He shot 4-16 from the field. He also had 5 rebounds. Marcus Sasser not too far behind with 12 points, 4 of 11 shooting. He had 5 assists, and he had 4 steals. Jarvis Walker came real close to having his third career double-double, 9 points and 12 rebounds, but he fell just short and down. Like you mentioned, Tremont Mark only had 6 points, 2 of 9 shooting for Mark. Now, Kris, I'll toss it over to you. Where can people find you, and anything else you'd like to end on?
Appreciate it, Andy. Thank you very much. You can find me on Twitter at some of y'all say the HR Review, THEHR Review. Also on HoustonRoundBallReview.com, Houston Roundball Review on TikTok and Instagram. And of course, we're all watching the show here on YouTube at Houston Roundball Review. Also, going forward, got to make free throws. Free throws are important to win basketball games, to seal the deal in wins. But I'm curious to see where the Cougs are ranked in terms of the Nets going forward and seeded in bracketology. But beyond that, 1-point loss today. Get it back on Wednesday in Orlando against UCF.
You can find me on all social media at Dayon Dunlap. Houston is going to continue they're going to bounce back. And so no really worries, but continue to support all of us, Kris, Andy, and we appreciate your support.
Absolutely. Once again, the final score from inside Fertitta Center, Houston falls to Temple 56-55. People can follow me on Twitter at @Yanez_5, but also be sure to follow the official Let's Rage Coogs account on Instagram and TikTok as you see it on the screen. For those of you listening to audio only, it's all lowercase Let's Rage Coogs. Just Let's Rage Coogs, no any extra symbols or anything like that. Just plain and simple, Let's Rage Coogs. And of course, follow us on Twitter at Pod Slamajama. That's PAWDSLAMAJAMA. Once again, we'll be back for Let's Rage Coogs following Houston's game against UCF come Wednesday night. It'll be a little bit of Let's Rage Coogs after dark, even though it'll be an East Coast game, so it'll be a little bit earlier than that. So until then, we'll be back. Thank you, of course, as always, for joining us, and we will see you on Wednesday nights.
Go Cougs.
Yeah.